Welcome to another fun ride. Today's guest, Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. Wow.
Yeah.
The doctor. It really heats up as it goes along. Like it's a pot that comes to a slow boil. So stick around. Like it gets better and better and better. And then we're throwing balms at each other.
BALMS, as Mark wants you all to know. And yeah, that was wonderful. And a friend of ours, so that was very nice to hang out with someone we both knew. And so
subscribe.
Support Blast and Compton Cowboys. And hit us up if there's something on your mind or you want to join a show or leave a rating and enjoy the ride.
Sis, hallo?
Blijven.
Dus je zeker wegen dem.
Yo je iets niet, joh.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
Hello, welcome, and we're live with another episode of Moped Outlaws. And today we are very happy to have a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller, who her study is the place of empathy, especially in the professional realm. So we're going to avoid that topic.
Yep, you're going to get to talk to things you don't normally get to talk about, Melissa.
Excellent. Perfect. It'll be exciting for everybody.
So, all beef hot dog, sauerkraut, or no sauerkraut?
Probably not hot dogs in the first place.
That's what I thought.
How come?
I just don't really like hot dogs. And coming from a German background on my mom's side, I'm not big on sauerkraut either.
Wow.
Got it. So we're off to a good fermenting start here.
There you go. Kimchi all day long, just no sauerkraut.
Oh, kimchi.
Yeah.
Got it. Nice.
Now, is that because of the spice?
Yes.
Okay. So do you like that show Hot Ones? Are you familiar with it on YouTube?
No.
Oh, man.
But I'm listening. Tell me more.
It's a interview podcast or whatever show, and the premise is they have 10 buffalo wings, sometimes vegan depending on the guest, and they get gradually hotter, and you take a bite, and then Sean, he's the host, and he'll be interviewing these guests, and they have amazing people on, like it's really blowing up into a international thing, and it's brilliant because there's one called the Balm, and it just blows people out of the water. And then they struggle to answer questions while they're on fire.
That sounds like Man versus Food when he used to do, because he would do like the, burger as big as your head challenge, but he would also do like the hottest whatever anywhere, because he did one, it was like deep fried ghost peppers and like this super sauce or whatever. And you're watching this poor guy and he's like sweating and crying and But he's doing it. He did. I can't imagine. His stomach's got to be one big ulcer, but he managed it.
So you don't go that hot?
No. My spice is internal, not external.
All right. Well, so next we'll have your husband on.
Well, I'm not a redhead for nothing.
Nice. Scoville rating 100. That's where we're at.
There you go. It's very Alton Brown of you. I like it.
Sizzling hot right now here at Moped Outlaws. The fuel of our moped right now is running off of Tabasco sauce for sure. In fact, Greg even wore the right t-shirt color for that. Anyway, it's funny how you and I are both into empathy in our professions. And for me, it was born of a kind of a loss. Like I really had to develop more then I had a lot really going into my adult life, but there were things that happened that had me deepen my relationship with empathy. And so how does empathy play out in your personal life, Melissa? Like we're going to get into the business thing later in your book and all of that, but
yeah. So for me, empathy has been kind of a lifelong struggle, honestly. And so my dad was military. We moved every 2 years. And, we would move from like Wisconsin to Kansas to New Orleans to Washington. So like really diverse cultures, even though we're within the same country, like they're really different cultures. And being pulled in and out of these schools every 2 years was really hard. And I felt very alienated because I felt like I didn't have that connection. I didn't really have connection with my close family a whole lot. My dad was just plain gone a lot. It was part of his job. It's what he had to do. But, I didn't really know my extended family. I still really don't. Any friends I made, it was always fleeting. It was 2 years in and out. Especially when you're a kid, you don't have a way to continue those relationships. So because of that, I never felt I had those connections. I never felt I had the interpersonal understanding. And it was something I was always seeking because I couldn't figure it out. And even past that, it seems like it was something that just kept coming in and out of my life where I wouldn't understand why other people wouldn't understand, or I wouldn't understand why I couldn't understand, or, this idea of trying to get a better handle on the whole unique being that is other people and that connection and understanding. So it's kind of been like a lifelong quest, really. It's that thing I'm always searching for because it feels like for whatever reason, I just can't ever get enough of it.
Well, so now you're in a completely new neighborhood and you're speaking to social connection. Is there something you're conscious of that you will be doing to create new connections in this new habitat of yours?
Absolutely. Because, like my husband, he's got a job. So he's got a certain amount of connection there, but I don't. Everything I do is pretty much from home. So my goal is to just be present. I want to be out going for walks. I want to be out going to the store. I want to be out in places where I can actually make those connections with people. And like last night, I was unloading some boxes in the garage and the neighbors across the street were actually out and I got to meet them. So, that's how human connection is made. It's in moments. But I think just being present, being available, being around,
So when was the last time you moved?
That would have been about 5 years ago, but then it was 2 years. It was a year. Yeah, we were in. Okay, so see, I got to go backwards here. So it would have been about 5 years ago. It was a year before that. It was 2 years before that. So
you're kind of repeating your dad's migrant pattern, aren't you?
Yeah, not on purpose, but yes.
Are you sure?
Well,
do you get the itch? My mom used to get the itch. She was raised by a colonel in the Air Force. He wasn't a colonel the whole time she was alive, but so she traveled around very much like you, only on a global scale. And so when we were growing up, this would happen to her. She would just be like, "Okay, I got to go. We need to go move somewhere else." And it fascinates me. So do you experience like an itch, a kind of pull for new horizons in your life?
It's more like I have an itch for things to be better. I think I'm always looking for that place where I feel like I fit. So we're back to empathy again, right? Because I don't feel like if I'm being completely transparent, I don't always feel like I fit in some of the places where I've been. Whereas like we did spend a certain amount of time on the West Coast, and of every place that I've been, that's where I felt I could be myself and be the most authentic. And so it's like, even though I've searched for that off of there, I have a feeling that may be where I end up, or I might end up overseas, because I've always felt that I fit in better there than I do here.
When you say overseas, are we talking France? What do you mean?
Like I got to spend a summer playing in Rome and I loved it. I felt like I fit in, even though, they thought I was hilarious because, I didn't look like any of them, but they were very open and understanding, and the culture and the joie de vivre and the food. Oh yeah, the food. I fit in just fine there. And then like last year I went to England a couple times and I felt like their culture and their understanding of global politics and globalism and just the way they interrelated to each other. I felt, and granted, I mean, these are, you're doing small little chunks of time as opposed to actually, living somewhere for 3 or 4 years. But I just felt like I could be myself. I didn't feel like I had to hide who I am because it wasn't acceptable.
So what does fitting in look like?
Just being able to be myself.
And how do you know you're being yourself?
Well, so here's an example. So I get to Kansas and I did a job interview and I just go in as myself, dressed the way I like to dress, looking the way I like to look. And the woman immediately goes, well, you're kind of odd. I think you could fit in here, but you're just kind of odd. And it's like, okay.
Well, so there is the potential that could be taken as a compliment, even though it's said in the way it's said.
There's that potential,
right?
But no.
All right.
In some cases, yes. In this case, no, I don't think so.
So you think she intended to make it sound like something you were weird and not in a good way?
Well, just that I wasn't one of them.
Right. So are there things then from an empathetic standpoint that one can do for others to help them feel as though they're fitting in?
Totally. I mean, just the first step would be to understand that the propensity to feel like you're not part of this is there, that you're not part of this culture, that, this person is coming in new. They don't necessarily know what the norms are. They don't know. Another one I run into a lot is I don't have kids. So I would go into a job and all of these women would have kids. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I was always kind of left out. That's what they would want to talk about. And that's what they would want to talk about almost exclusively. And it was like, it was never intentional, but it was like, okay, I don't fit into this either.
So what's like Mark and I find ourselves in this position where every week we're hanging out with a stranger. In this case, we're not. That's wonderful. But what would you like? Are there things you could give to us that we could put into practice that would help a stranger feel immediately at ease?
That's a great question, because I do think it comes back to empathy and that understanding and connection. And for the person wanting the other person to feel, the person wanting to give the empathy, I think the biggest thing is just to be open and vulnerable. That I'm here, I'm open to who you are and what you have to say, and I don't have to agree with everything. I don't have to love everything. We don't even have to discuss it. We're just here. We're present. We're in this moment. And I'm open to whoever you are. I'm not judging. I'm not fixing. I'm not. Just here we are. We're just present and together. And that's it.
Would you say that that's self-observation? When you want to extend that kind of grace to someone, the first place to start is being in the awareness of how you're reacting and how you're speaking to them, right?
Oh, totally. It's not unlike, trying to approach an animal. You can't come in and be like, hey, I'll be here and expect them to be thrilled to see you. You have to kind of be quiet and be open and, understand where they're coming from and what their propensity is, and allow them to come to you, but just be open and vulnerable.
You said that word vulnerable now a couple of times. And one of the things that I've come across in my work is that it's getting rusty.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think there's something underneath it that's worth exploring. And the way that I frame it is transparency, courageous transparency. And I choose this definition because a lot of my work is with men. And when you talk about vulnerability, the context is, well, if you're vulnerable in battle, then you're going to succumb or be killed, right? Or if you're vulnerable in a context where you're, quote, at risk of loss of something, whether it's position or, whatever, good assignments in your job role, whatever it is, there's this thing that comes with the word vulnerability that often makes men like go, ugh, right? And so to me, courageous transparency is the phrase that replaces vulnerability. And I'm wondering, like, do you concur? And what are your thoughts on what's the essence of vulnerability? What are we really talking about when we use that word?
I think that's a fantastic question, because I think we're talking about a difference in semantics. I use the word vulnerability because it's what people understand. And you're right, it's been overused, but because it's been overused, people hear it and they understand it. And especially people outside of our field. It's overused in our field, but outside of our field, not necessarily. So if you're dealing with a population, say men, that they're going to make that kind of connection, like, well, if you're vulnerable as a warrior, you've opened yourself up to harm. I can see where semantically that might not be the best word to use, and that open transparency might be better, because you're saying it's the same idea of being completely open and in a way that you can see everything that's going on. I think there again, we're talking about being able to understand and be open to the other person and communicate in whatever way gets to them the best. Because, that's one of the limitations of language, right? You've got to have a transmitter and you've got to have a receiver. And what's being transmitted may or may not be what's being received. So you've got to be aware of what's going on in the middle to make sure, semantically, emotionally, or otherwise, that you're receiving what I'm transmitting and I'm not just throwing noise out into the cosmos.
Yeah, I think another semantic definition that would be really helpful in this conversation is empathy. Mm-hmm. Right? What would you talk about the underlying aspects of empathy? How does empathy work, or how would you know that you're being empathetic with someone?
So this is coming from a research standpoint. So again, semantically, the way people understand this might be different than what I'm going to say. But the thing about empathy is that there's actually 43 different kinds that fall into 8 broad categories. So when we just say empathy and it's the I feel what you feel, that's one kind, but there's 42 others. So at its heart, empathy is about connection and understanding. It's not necessarily about feeling. It's not necessarily about what we think of when we think of empathy. So in being able to relate empathy to other people, it's more like you want to have understanding, and it may be through emotion, but it may be through logic. It's called cognitive empathy. It may be an empathy that you have for yourself with self-empathy. There's empathy with nature. There's empathy with animals. There's empathy for groups of people. It all falls under this huge umbrella. So when I'm trying to teach it and I'm actually talking about it, it's about understanding and connection, which is where the vulnerability piece comes in, because in order to connect, you're getting that back and forth, which means you have to be open or vulnerable to whatever is coming back as well.
So trust is one of the precursors to empathy.
If it isn't, I think it can be built through empathy. Mm. Sometimes I think it's a chicken or egg kind of thing.
Got it.
That does remind me that contemplating connection with people, I was realizing that sometimes if I'm overly careful with someone, I'm seeing their weakness instead of their strength. In other words, if I didn't tell a joke that I thought was funny because I thought I might offend you both, mm-hmm. Well, I'm playing to the weakest part of you instead of the strongest part of you.
But weakest according to whom?
Well, potentially the circumstance, I suppose. An easier way to communicate might be, sometimes I think, myself included, we don't tell the truth when someone asks us a direct question because we believe we will hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake, because what we are witnessing and giving credence to the weakest part of them instead of acknowledging that they can't be hurt. They're going to be fine. No matter what I say. They've asked me a question. They want the answer. They're going to be fine. Even if there's a blow up, it's going to be fine. So
I think there's a number of issues here. One of which is what what's socially acceptable in certain contexts for people and what breaks down connection versus what maintains connection, which is, I think, one of the things you're speaking to, Greg. But there's also this idea of when is authenticity being set aside in favor of performative sort of manipulation, and what, how are we able to be more authentic with each other without causing damage?
And see, I think we can be authentic, and the damage is actually non-existent the more we're authentic. And it might be a blow up, it might be fire, but to trust that everyone involved is going to be fine. That's not the end all, isn't the fire. That's just.
But words have consequences. So if my authentic expression involves using a word that causes harm or upset, then there's an element there that needs to be like tempered. Right? And that doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic. It means I'm being careful, full of care.
That the N-word right now in our society it's a socially agreed harmful word. And we just don't have to play with that at all.
Well, there's the B word, there's the C word, there's a bunch of them.
Right. So I don't give the same credence to those words.
Okay, but there's still harm in them, whether you give them credence or not. To
some people, not to.
Right.
And not across the board the way the other one is.
But that's a comparison without a distinction. The harm is still real.
To that individual it is, yes, in that moment. And let me say this. Those other words you mentioned do not have the historical context that our nation has given to that one particular word. And that.
I'll grant you the degree of severity is different, but that's not the point. The point is authenticity sometimes can lean into harm.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And it's not irrelevant. It's not like, I guess whatever the fire is as a result of my authenticity isn't necessarily who cares kind of proposition. It is important to be conscious of our impact. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I'm actually hearing two things here. I'm hearing two different things going on, because the first one, as far as using that word with or any word, I mean, it could be any word, right? With someone and having it potentially be harmful, that is empathy, right? If I'm understanding and connecting with another person, then I'm going to understand that, this word is going to have different weight and different ramifications depending on who I'm talking to. But the other side of that is that when empathy is working really well, it goes in both directions. So if you're saying something unintentional that maybe you don't mean to harm, the other person can connect with you and say, okay, maybe that wasn't appropriate, man, but I understand that your intent wasn't bad, so let's just not do that again. So, I mean, again, communication, we're going both ways.
That I agree with. That's what I guess I'm saying is I'm for leaning into this vulnerable place of potential harm.
I think you'd need to judge the other person, because if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But you need to be able to have that connection with the other person to understand that, yes, they're going to be open to this and understand that I don't mean any harm, or no, this is not. It's a case specific thing.
It's a calibration. One of the ways that connection is maintained is through calibration with each other.
Yep. It's just that you can shut down that connection. And if you shut it down, it can be very, very hard to rebuild. So, it is something to respect.
Right. And then I think one of the sweet spots for Greg, if I'm hearing him correctly, is that there's this point at which we become capped in our authenticity, our individuality, and our full expression of ourselves becomes contained by social pressures and conditioning, and that oftentimes, particularly white men don't suffer from this as much, but I think there are groups of people who it's riskier to be fully expressed, women in particular, in certain spaces, and then other, different groups that are, it's not okay. It's not safe. It's okay, but it's not safe for them. And so in our calibration, in the moment of socialization with and working with a group or an individual, empathy is the ability to recognize beforehand what the impact of our communication might be. Am I right? Am I on track, Doctor?
Well, yeah, the thing is you're not always going to recognize it. So just at least doing the best you can. I think there's a lot to be said for intent. Am I intending well? Am I intending to create connection, understanding, or am I intending to throw a bomb into the middle of this? I think good intent goes a long way.
So I want to ask Greg a really vulnerable question.
Excellent.
Are you up for that, Greg? What?
Sure. What kind of fool would I be if I said no?
You're allowed to say no. I mean, that's what consent is. Okay, so do you like throwing bombs in conversations, Greg? Is it something you enjoy? Is there humor and sort of some titillation for you in it?
I like throwing bombs into unconsciousness.
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, the way you ask the question is too broad. Because if I say yes to just the question you asked, then that's I like walking into the downtown square and just making a ruckus. And that's not what I like. But I do like throwing bombs into unconsciousness.
So would you call yourself a transformation agent provocateur?
Whoa.
I'd call myself an angry old man.
Get off my lawn.
You damn kids, get off my lawn.
Wow.
That was the best answer ever.
Just never know where this ride is going to take us. Thank you for that, Greg. I think your question in this discourse really made me cry.
Here's one thing that keeps coming up for me. They have the news on where I go to work out, and I've seen the past 48 hours, it seems there's been a lot of violent events of people driving into crowds and chaos erupting. Yeah. And in this conversation the three of us are having, I'm wondering if the individuals who came to that choice came because they were not heard. They were not understood. And any attempt they had to be heard and understood was thwarted. So this anger and pressure and desire for connection just gets hotter and hotter and hotter until it blows up in a violent manner. And I know, Melissa, you and I have had conversations in the past about the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. And I guess I'm wondering how communication and empathy, what part, is it a balm to these scenarios of really intense psychiatric damage?
On behalf of the person committing them or on behalf of the victims?
The one, hopefully the one who would commit it before it's committed.
I think that it is absolutely one of the things that could act as a balm if it were applied early enough and sincerely enough, and by someone who is very understanding that this person could be harboring a lot of very volatile emotions. I mean, if it's so volatile that they're doing something like that, then, they've reached some kind of tipping point. So I think on behalf of that person, that absolutely, I mean, you look at some of these groups that are out there and some of what they write about, because you can see the blogs, you can see not that these people are always part of a group, but there have been some in the recent past, and there's always a lot of us versus them in there. And I think there is a certain amount of me versus them that could come into play. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that empathy becomes harder when you're dealing with groups of people. Joseph Stalin, and it makes me cringe to say this, but he said that one death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths are a statistic. And unfortunately, when you deal with people that are trying to harm large groups of people, it's a lot easier to label that group and harm them because you're no longer thinking of them as people. That empathic person-to-person connection is missing, which is why you can get some of this mass destruction like that.
And just for anyone that's listening, the word balm is with an L. It might also be referred to as salve, not bomb, like explosive.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Give my accent.
Not you. I was just clarifying. There's no one's wrong here. I'm just like, it's an audio medium too. I feel like there's a piece here in your theory, Greg, that doesn't hold water, which is that you can extend so much empathy and so much social grace and provide a lot of nutritious community context with people, and they might still be prone to acts of violence as a result of their own internal misalignment.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm reading what you said correctly, Greg, the idea is that to the degree that we all create better relationships with each other on a social scale, the potential reduction of violent outbursts like this can be achieved. And I would like to believe that myself. And I do think there is some evidence that suggests things like school shootings, drivers careening into crowds, that are mental health issues in those situations. There's a significant statistical data point about those people being on certain kinds of antidepressant drugs. Like when you do the examination of various school shootings and stuff like that, there is a significant portion of those people that are being treated pharmaceutically for psychological conditions. And I think that becomes kind of a secondary hurdle to get over in terms of preventing them from acting out violently. And
that drugs become a secondary hurdle?
No, the idea that their internal dynamic, the way that their psycho-emotional structure works, and as evidenced by the fact that they're being treated with drugs, is a contributing factor. So I'm not blaming the pharmaceuticals, but I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that not everyone who is not feeling connected is going to lash out violently. And not everyone that wants to lash out violently can be proactively met with love to prevent that.
Well, and I think maybe what Greg was talking about too, we had a conversation at one point, specifically talking about psychopaths and sociopaths. So you're looking at the range of human behavior, right? And there is actually what's called a light triad on one end, which is going to be people that have a lot of empathy. But people that lack empathy sometimes completely fall into the dark triad. And those are sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, and Machiavellians. And they're actually talking about adding a fourth category for paranoia, I think. There's another one too. There are people that are pushing to add to this. But anyway, the point is that psychopaths and sociopaths in particular are just very interesting to our society because they completely lack empathy. And sociopaths are made, psychopaths are born. There's something psychologically, biologically that are part of who they are. And no amount of empathy is going to help that because they don't have any. They don't understand it. There is no connection and they don't care.
It's not part of their lived experience, so they don't have a reference point for it.
No, and they don't care because what they do, as far as they're concerned, gets them ahead. They don't want to do any different. It's actually those aren't considered actual mental illnesses. Like in the DSM-5, it's not considered a disorder because a disorder is defined by the person who's feeling it having discomfort. Well, they're not uncomfortable. They're very happy being who they are.
I remember this conversation. We were talking about how a psychopath was a perfect warrior.
Possibly. They think there might have been an evolutionary role for them at some point.
Right.
Yeah. Who knows? I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. I just know this is the information.
It's called marauding.
Yeah.
Right.
Berserker.
The Viking, madman who would just go pillage and rape without any, and.
Well, I'll self-confess, I have a genetic lineage that does go back to the Norse area of Europe. And what I noticed about my first grade disciplinary actions was that it said in my paperwork, and I went home several times, Mark has a hot temper, right? So
I never noticed that.
Yeah. So that's also sometimes associated with the other side of my genetic lineage, which is Sicilian.
Oh.
So there's this potential in me for heavy anger, right? But fortunately, it's not what I would call physiologically ingrained in me to the degree that I'm dysfunctional or violent. But I have noticed there are certain points when I do become aggressive, right? And I have, as a child, hit people, right? And been sent home, right? He did happen to be a bully, but my justifications for violence notwithstanding, it's still violence. So it's really interesting because as we see sort of what we've created now in the conversation is there are kind of bounds to where empathy can be of use to us.
Yeah. And
at the same time, it's so critical to improving our social structures, our business structures, and our personal lives with each other. Yeah. So I would like to move sort of in the direction of your book, like the empathetic leader. Why is leadership so well served by empathy?
Well, for two reasons. Number one is because leadership not only has the ability to affect the most people positively, but also the potential to affect large groups of people negatively, but also, and with, carrot and stick kind of thing, because if you actually use empathy and you use it well, there is data that shows it does improve profit, productivity, and innovation. You can create a better business that's better for all, including the bottom line, if you can use this effectively. So there's no reason not to.
So what are the things that are most deficient in our typical top of the pile sort of leaders that they would need to learn in order to improve their ability to be empathetic?
The way our leadership systems tend to be set up, for the most part, the people on the top are very removed from the other people. So they don't necessarily know what their everyday life looks like. They're lacking the understanding. They're lacking the connection. They're lacking that empathy that is interpersonal. So the first thing that they actually need to do is get out of the office and meet their people. You're humanizing them. You understand where they're coming from. There's the connection. There's the understanding. That's the first step. And you can do it without spending all day long doing it. You can do it in 10-minute increments. But having that connection is what's going to allow you to actually make the best decisions. The other one is to get away from this idea that in order to be a leader, you have to be strong and you're infallible and you don't make mistakes and this kind of thing. Because people get this idea that in order to do that, you can't have empathy because empathy is soft. And there's actually nothing farther from the truth, because to have true empathy and to have that openness and willingness to connect and understand other people takes great courage. So I think those are two big ones. Go ahead.
I have something to throw out to you both, because I was ruminating about Trump this morning and thinking about if I had a bullet list of all these things, like, a bully, being sued, the legal things, all these things I would say this individual, there's no way they could be president. And they certainly couldn't be president again. And he did it. And I was like, that's amazing. You know, really, if just looking at a bullet list and of accomplishment, it's an amazing accomplishment. And I'm wondering, is it plausible that he actually is very empathetic with the individuals he interacts with on a regular, daily, moment-to-moment basis?
So do you want to go, Mark, or do you want me to go?
I have a theory. Why don't you riff off mine? I think it's Machiavellian empathy, which is to say that it's performative.
It's dark empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so I think there's two ways to look at this. And I don't think that that's wrong necessarily. I think that the people that put him in office probably feel a great amount of empathy for him and think that they feel that he feels for them, for their situation, for their beliefs, for what they feel is going on in their lives. And I've also read and heard that of the people that he is closest to, he really listens and is open to what they have to say. Now, does that mean that it isn't dark empathy? Which dark empathy is what psychopaths use. It's looking like you have empathy. It's acting like you have empathy without having any at all. That's what it is. It's cognitive empathy without any tempering at all. Do I think that's possible? Yeah, I do. But I think that's possible for a lot of big political figures. If we look at the statistics, we figure that the dark triad people are about 2 to 7% of our population, give or take. But people that are in top positions in government, in healthcare, and in corporations, it could be as high as 25%.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think it's quite possible.
So what's the process at work there that has us having this result? Can you unpack it at all?
For these people getting those top positions?
Yeah, and structurally, but then also, you know, human performance based.
It's power. Those people tend, so when you think of specifically psychopaths and sociopaths, they have a real difficulty with feeling anything, with feeling pleasure, with feeling pain, with feeling, that's why, like, you'll hear about serial killers, and not all psychopaths are serial killers, and not all serial killers are psychopaths, but they'll continue to ramp up what they do to get more and more heightened emotion out of it, because they don't feel emotion like we do at all. That's why they can hurt people. That's why they can hurt animals. And why you'll see a ramping up, you know, like they'll do their first one within a month, and then it's a couple weeks, and then it's a couple days, and then it's a couple within a day. They're looking for that supercharged, you know, excitement, pleasure, feel anything. And I think these high positions of power probably attract people like that, because what could be more energizing than being one of the top leaders in the free world, you know? And that goes with dark triad right there. I think the other part of it is just power and money. And that tends to attract, you know, you think of like grandiose narcissists who are also dark triad. They are always looking for that stage that I am the greatest, that I am the best. Well, we're better than being in a top position like that.
So in the case of our current president, there could be a dark narcissist sort of operating his strategic way he manages things. But there might also be slivers, silver linings, if you will, of the belief that he does actually is doing something that will help humanity. Like there's some sense in him that what he's doing is necessary and important and helpful, and that he believes, and a lot of his constituents believe, are the medicine, as it were, for what ails us. And so there's love there in that sense.
I think to some degree from some people, yeah, or he wouldn't be there.
Well, no, but he has love for America, and he has love for the way he sees what he's doing is an act of love.
You know, without ever talking to the guy, I really couldn't say for sure, but I would say it's a distinct possibility.
Got it. So that gives us, and I mean, I'm gonna out myself. I was a registered Democrat up until January 1st, 2025. I'm no longer a Democrat. But I've begun to see how we we pull back our empathy and our sympathy for people when we feel threatened politically.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm starting to see in this particular framework of the president, since we're talking about him, since Greg brought him up, and the guise of empathetic leadership, is that there's something in there that reads like care. And it's informing his willingness to step into difficult situations and do difficult things based on his logic around what's necessary to provide the broadest sense of caring for our country.
I think it's possible, but I also think there needs to be a distinction made that people at that level usually are not acting completely alone. They usually have handlers, they have advisors, they have other people that are telling them this is what you need to do, or you should do this, or you should try that. So is everything that he's doing completely of his own volition? I doubt it. I think some of it is also coming from the circle that he surrounds himself with. But is it possible that he actually believes he's doing the right things within those confines? Yeah, I think that's very possible.
Yeah. So one of the things that we may have treaded into here as part of this podcast is getting into politics and judgment about people's politics. And that's such a divisive issue in our country. And I think the idea behind your book, The Empathetic Leader, is that that actually can be transcended to some degree. Internal office politics, leadership structures can all benefit from the kind of connection that's built through empathetic leadership. So how have you seen that happen in real time? What insights do you have about dysfunctional organizations and how empathetic leadership has shifted them?
I've actually seen stuff happen really fast, because I was working with a director, went in to do his take over where he was at, and his people were having really low performance scores. They were really having low I'm losing the word all of a sudden.
KPIs.
They weren't happy. They weren't happy at all. So he came in, and the first thing I told him is, you've got to connect with these people as people. I want you to go out. You're a director. You can meet every one of these people every day, and you can do it in 10 minutes. And oh, by the way, you'll get up from behind your computer and walk around, which is actually going to help you. So it's a win-win situation. So just go and say, hey, how's you doing? How's it going? How's the baby? How's the job? What's happening? Because these people saw him every day and he made this person-to-person connection. Next thing you know, he had people coming to him with ideas because they are in the trenches every day. They know what would make things more efficient. They know what would make their jobs better. They know what would raise productivity. And they trusted him with this information. He listened to them. He helped them implement it. The employee scores went up. Productivity went up. He got the innovation from his people, which is where it should have come from, because these are the people that live with it every day. And because of that, the profits of his center went up. Now, this happened within 30 days. And I've gotten this disbelief about it that, he changed culture in 30 days. No, there was still work to be done. But here's the thing. These people, these employees were already thinking about this. They already knew what would make this better. They were just waiting for the right outlet. So when he was there, they were primed. They wanted it. So 30 days. And the culture started to make a huge shift within that amount of time because he went and made human connection.
Wow, that's a powerful story. And the premise of your book is that can happen in every organization, for every group, in small, large, 10,000 person companies and, 24 person small businesses.
Absolutely. Yes.
And right now, if you go to your website, eqviaempathy.com, you can pre-order that book. But when is it going to be available?
June 17th.
Ooh.
Yep. So it's coming soon. It's like right around the corner.
Yeah. Damn, I didn't know you had a hard deadline.
I do. And it's 3 days before my birthday. So I'll still be 51.
And how does that line up with your upcoming TED Talk?
So I finished the TED Talk. That was April 3rd. And it's supposed to be released early summer. So it could happen right about the same time.
Fantastic. And do you mention the book in the TED Talk?
I don't. Nope. The TED Talk was geared specifically towards self-judgment and self-empathy. because I really wanted to give people something that they could use on the individual level. What can I give people that they can take and make their lives better today? So that was the focus of that talk.
So what's a short version, like the Crib Notes version of the method for Greg or I or our audience to give ourselves more self-empathy?
The first big one is to get rid of the self-judgment. Judgment and empathy cannot exist in the same space, period. Whether it's between people. Yes.
I think Greg has some judgment about that.
I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that judgment with my empathy, Greg.
I do. Well, because at the very beginning of our hanging out on this ride, Mark brought up about self-awareness.
Yep.
It could be semantics, but it seems to me, in my experience, judgment is a part of my awareness. If part of my awareness is, how did I affect the environment I was just in? Did I create consultation? Did I create trouble? Or did people seem happy? How did I feel?
So you're talking judgment as far as just critiquing. That's what I call critical not caring. You're looking at it, you're chewing up the data just like a computer, but you're not attaching any feelings or any labels to it at all. The kind of judgment I'm talking about is, oh, I messed that up and now I'm a failure. Oh, I've completely screwed up this relationship and I'm done forever. It's judgment as far as labeling and taking yourself down that emotional rabbit hole.
Inner critic.
Yeah. Yeah. But the really destructive kind that starts layering emotions on, which become really hard to dig through.
Okay. And we were just talking about the dark triad being emotionless.
No. The dark triad is not emotionless. They have little to no empathy, but they have emotion. Have you ever seen a narcissist have a fit? There's a lot of emotion there.
So that isn't just for show to get a response?
Mm-mm.
That's
Nope.
really connected to a real emotion.
Oh, yeah. Usually it's actually connected to feeling very, very inferior. Narcissism is very interesting because it does tend to go back to childhood and being treated badly. It's one of those situations where you actually have to be careful that you don't give too much empathy to an actual dyed-in-the-wool real narcissist, because it will destroy you. That's a whole different thing.
Tune in next week.
Yeah.
Emotional vampirism.
Yeah, no. Dark Triad, they have emotions. They're lacking empathy.
They experience their own, but they can't project themselves intellectually onto others' experience of emotions.
They can do it intellectually. That's dark empathy. It's cognitive empathy they can do. It's actual affective, emotional empathy that they don't. And that's how you'll get people that are actual certifiable psychopaths in prison that can figure out how to say the right things on the tests and the right things to the parole board. And they're using cognitive empathy to know what these people want to hear. And that's dark empathy because there's no actual empathy there. They're just going through the motions.
This would be a good spot, I think, to distinguish between sympathy and empathy from a definitional standpoint. Are you up for that?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay.
So empathy, you're seeing the other person from their point of view. The definition I like best is empathy is what allows me to step out of my bubble and into yours. So again, there's no judgment. You're not taking responsibility. You're not trying to fix anything. You're just in that person's emotion through their eyes. Sympathy, you're seeing the situation through your own eyes, which means that you're probably placing judgment on it, which is why you get people that'll say things that are supposed to be, something that's supposed to be helpful, but yet they always kind of come off a little weird, like, oh, well, at least they didn't suffer long. Or, oh, well, everything happens for the best. I mean, it's not about the truth or untruth of those statements. It's that they're saying them to make themselves feel better rather than make the person who needs empathy feel better. People in healthcare are actually trained not to use sympathy because of that judgment aspect. Because if you go to a patient who's having potentially the worst day of their life, and you come in with what feels like judgment and pity to them, which is what sympathy does, that's not going to go well.
I just saw a movie trailer yesterday, and there's a doctor, and he's saying to these two women, I know how hard this is to experience. And one of the women looked at him and goes, it doesn't seem like you do.
Yeah.
It was a great moment in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really about the point of view.
Stepping into someone's bubble. Maybe I'm a sociopath. Like I don't quite, like, how can I step into Mark's bubble or your bubble?
It just means you're connecting with me on my terms instead of connecting with me on your terms.
I would invite you not to be so critical of it, Greg, in the sense that if you feel some impediment there, that's okay. It doesn't make you into something.
Agreed.
I'm a chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, I'm not a marathon runner, right? But if every day I went and ran like a quarter mile and then a half mile, and, you know, in 20 years, I might be a marathon runner. That's how long it might take for me. Oh,
Greg likes labels. We had this discussion yesterday. He was using the word failure, and I'm like, no, it's not failure. Well, it's a question of semantics. Well, yes, I suppose it is, but you're still not a failure or a chocolate cake. You're off the hook.
You're a salty dog.
Someone left my cake out in the rain.
You're an angry old man.
Our very own Gran Torino.
Oh my God, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah. And he turns out he's capable of empathy for the one character.
That's
right?
why it's so beautiful. Yeah. I mean, God damn, that movie in an hour and a half just was a miracle. I love that movie.
But that's how you know it was a good movie. It was done so well that you were able to have empathy for these characters. Yeah. You had a human connection.
Yeah. And when he's driving the Gran Torino with the rolling credits and that song playing, I was just like, oh.
Well, as we get close, there's a couple more questions I want to ask. That one of the things I looked at when I was researching this podcast was you have a formula on your website, and the formula is empathy plus action equals change. We've talked a lot about empathy in this conversation. Mm-hmm. What do we know about, or what can you tell us about what right action is in combination with empathy to elicit the kind of change that we want?
So actual action based on empathy, by definition, is compassion. That's what compassion is, and people tend to get that confused a lot. Mm-hmm. So while empathy is I'm just in the feeling, I'm not doing anything, I'm not, trying to change anything, you have to have that compassion and component of taking action based on that empathy. And when you do that, then you can elicit change. This is where I use the treadmill analogy, right? Where it's great if you have a treadmill, but if it sits in your corner and you hang clothes on it, you're not using it, it doesn't do you any good. Same with empathy. If you don't use it actionably, that's really nice. It's good to have, but you're not actually going to get anything out of it. You have to use it actionably, just like that treadmill, if you want to elicit change.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So let's say that you have a friend, right? And this friend is just really sad and very depressed, and you're in that feeling with them, and you understand that they're depressed, and you've just been in that emotion. You understand empathically what's going on. But now you're beginning to feel that you need to take some action on this. You need to be able to get your friend some kind of help. If you just sit in that empathy and you just feel the emotion, the action that friend needs, they might not be able to get it. If you take compassionate action and try to help them actually get the help that they need, now you're eliciting change. And there's no judgment there either. Sometimes all you need is empathy and to be in the feeling. Sometimes that's what you need, but sometimes you have to take action. And for those in leadership positions, taking compassionate action based on empathy is what's going to elicit the change.
And in that action step, I feel like there's an important piece around consent. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's different in a leadership position versus a personal.
Say more about that.
Sorry?
Say more about that.
Well, if you're in a leadership position, I mean, you're making decisions for large groups. You have to run a business. A business has got to make money, or it isn't a business for very long. So some of the things that you do as an employee, you give up a certain amount of your consent for pay. You just do. That's part of the deal. If we're talking one-on-one, human to human, yes, then it's all about consent. But I think they're two different things.
I think there could be an instance where, let's say we all give consent at the beginning of a friendly relationship that we're all in it to better ourselves. Okay, that part of that consent is we're going to move out of our current comfort zone, which means I'm not going to like it sometimes. And a year from now, it may be that you both are like throwing a bomb in my situation, because that's the energy it's going to take to pry me out of this comfort zone to my better good. And I think sometimes that can't be verbalized beforehand. Sometimes in relationship, for the health of all involved and the health of the relationship involved, you're going to do something that is explosive, not necessarily angry being the emotion, but explosive. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation when I was saying, and you trust the strength of the individuals involved. Everyone's going to be okay. That's where my faith is.
So there's a idiom here in noir-based films where the masculine hero slaps the hysterical woman.
Or the hysterical man.
Or the hysterical man. And does that fit with the example you're kind of giving, Greg?
It does fit.
Got it. So
well, I would like to I don't want to cut you off. You finish.
No, that's good. Go ahead.
Who determines what my greater good is?
In the analogy that Mark just gave, the fact that you're going to live another hour is the fact that made the slap okay.
Yes. Okay. If the situation is that dire, but that's still through your eyes, through my eye. I mean, shouldn't I have a certain amount of personal autonomy to be able to determine my own judgment and not have someone else tell me this is what's best for you?
And there's the rub. So absolutely, every individual is autonomous for themselves all the time.
Except when Greg slaps them.
Well, no, so that's the beauty. Like okay, I'm not going to go there because that'll just blow up unless you're both willing to go another 20 minutes past our normal hour. Are you familiar with orgasm meditation? And Nicole, who created this one touch thing in the Bay Area, and it spread out throughout the world, really?
No, that's a no.
Yeah.
So it is an amazing practice, and it's was bringing consciousness it's bringing consciousness to this realm of humanity, orgasm, that is usually very unconscious, even with the people participating, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. To come back to what you're saying.
Yeah, great breath, Greg. Love that.
In the analogy we have me slapping someone and a person being slapped.
Yeah.
The person being slapped never lost full autonomy to react as they choose to.
Okay. But
Is there
you're
more?
saying
They might pull out a gun and shoot me.
But you're saying as a direct result of that slap that you have extended their life by another hour or another day or whatever. And my question is, how do you determine that? How do you know what's best for me better than I know what's best for me?
Because we got out of the world.
The ends do not justify the means. I'm sorry. That's not an accurate argument.
It does. In this case, you brought up
because if you didn't slap them, they might have survived an hour anyway as well. And you don't know.
Well, how do you know that being slapped is what they needed?
Okay, so you brought up the war analogy. And in war, okay, I could say this from my personal experience from making a film. There are times where I don't have time for a 20-minute conversation. We got to move now. And I've pissed people off before. And then later on, we can have a discussion about what happened. And I can go into empathy and listen and really hear them and take breaths, and then they could hear me. But in that moment, there's money on the line. There's a crew of 20 people. There's all this stuff. And we're doing this, and we're doing it now.
Yeah, authority.
Is the equivalent of a slap to the face.
No.
Wait, in this individual, it was. I didn't literally slap them.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Experience was a slap.
Right.
Right. But number one, you're talking about the greater good of a system. Now we're talking about system dynamics, which is exactly what I was talking about the organization, that you're running a business, that you're not going to have consent from everybody because it's a trade-off. I am trading my time for your money. And because of that, I'm giving up a certain amount of consent. So you're talking about systems dynamic within a person-to-person consent conversation. And I'm not sure that we're talking about two different things.
No, I don't think we are. Because as you said yesterday when we were hanging out, we are in systems.
Yes.
Like the three of us are in system right now. And it's not just a system of the Moped Outlaws podcast. It's a system of the homes we're in, the towns we're in. Mm-hmm. We are in systems that are working right now. And sometimes you're going to slap my fucking face because that's what's needed right now.
But that's as a result of the system. That's not as a result of our interpersonal relationship, because were we not constrained by the system, maybe I wouldn't.
But that's our whole gravity conversation. What's it matter? It exists. It's not right or wrong. It is.
But if we're talking about consent within a vacuum, right? We're talking about it in a perfect world and having that consent, then you're not layering systems on top of that. You're layering complexity, which is fine. It's true. It's part of life. But I think they're two different conversations.
So I'm going to bring us around full circle a little bit for a second.
Thank you.
There's an element here of the hypothesis being that sometimes a slap is compassionate action in the face of empathy. I think we could leave that off as something we may or may not get to a conclusion about in this conversation and leave as an open question. However, I think there are societal norms that suggest slapping is not considered one of the higher priority responses, considering there's laws against it and there's also HR ramifications in a professional environment and that sort of thing. Yeah. But the power of a argument, i.e. a logical description of events and authority structures in a system, can be emotionally uncomfortable for the person who is forced to acquiesce to the hierarchy that they've consented to be part of.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so that, I think, underlines Greg's point of view in a sense. Without us, it got kind of abstract. And for those of you who are wondering about orgasmic meditation, we'll do another episode about that.
Do a Google search.
Yeah. But,
it's not
we don't have time for that. But what I think is really powerful is, Melissa, you've showed a lot of empathy for us here today. You've demonstrated the descriptions of it and the systemic applications of it and the definitions. How did you get all this stuff?
A lot of personal experience and a lot of research. I'm finishing up my dissertation on leadership and empathy. So, because I wanted to put the power behind the machine. I knew what I thought, and I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I had experienced, but I wanted to have the data and the research to back it up. So that's the whole enchilada.
So there's a potential for global and American business to increase its functionality, its profitability, its resource management, its sustainability, and lower liability lawsuits, all through the use of empathetic leadership.
Absolutely. Every one of those and more.
Thank you so much for doing the work, for working on the research and all those things, and then being so generous with us with your time today. And we look forward to seeing your TED Talk and getting a copy of The Empathetic Leader. Again, if you want a copy of that, you can pre-order it at eqviaempathy.com. That's eqviaempathy.com, and get Melissa's book. Now, before we wrap it up completely, we have one more question for you.
Well, wait, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to mention before we close this out?
No, this conversation's been fantastic. I love hanging out with you guys. I hope your audience had as much fun with it as I did. This was a perfect way to have a Friday afternoon after a week of moving. So
Awesome.
Thank you for having me on, because this was a lot of fun.
All right, so here's the question. Foo Fighters or Eminem?
Oh, that's dirty pool. What era of Eminem?
No, you don't get to qualify it. You just got to go.
You can for yourself, but we won't be helping.
We might not be empathetic about you qualifying.
But they're two different things. You're comparing apples and Ferraris.
Well, do you want to drive fast or have something to eat?
I'd probably rather drive fast. So we'll do Slim Shady Eminem. Today, tomorrow I'll want something to eat, and I'd rather have Dave Grohl. So, see?
Yeah. So you think that Eminem was better when he was first starting off than he currently is?
I do. I think he was less angry and he was more cheeky, and that spoke to me.
And so it's Eminem, Foo Fighters. Eminem wins as long as it's the Slim Shady version.
Today. See, that's the problem, is tomorrow when I want that apple and I don't feel like driving anywhere, then I'd rather have Dave Grohl. So
awesome.
Yeah.
This question is our question for every guest because of those kinds of answers, because there's really no way to know what's going to happen when you ask someone that question. You played full out today, Dr. Robinson-Winemiller. We are the grateful recipients of your largesse and sense of humor. Stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Recording stopped.